Hello, my name is Praveen Kumar. I work as a product specialist in Informatica Global Customer Support team. Today in this video, I'm going to discuss about dynamic deployment group and the PowerCenter tool. Today's agenda is to understand what is a deployment group. Under that, we will see in detail what is a dynamic deployment group, and we will be having a live demo on the dynamic deployment process. After that, general tips for the dynamic deployment group. So, what is a deployment group? Deployment group is considered as a global object inside PowerCenter tool. Deployment group is used for migration purposes. Migration for what? For the Informatica objects. So Informatica objects can participate in deployment group for migrating from one folder to another folder, or we can use this process for different repositories as well. We can migrate few Informatica objects or selected Informatica objects from one repository to another repository. Selection of these Informatica objects will be done with two ways. One via a static method and second by dynamic method. We will see more about dynamic method. So inside dynamic deployment group, objects can be selected from a query result set. When we define a dynamic deployment group, at that time we need to assign a query to the group which can fetch objects to participate in the deployment. There is no manual addition or deletion of objects into this dynamic deployment process. We need to write the query in such a way that the parent objects and their dependent child objects should come as a query result set, which would be used as a object inside deployment group. For composite objects, all the dependencies should be deployed for the first time. We can use labels for grouping the versioned objects for deployment purpose. For more information about labels, you can find out another video. Now we will have a live demo on the dynamic deployment process. This is my repository manager, where I have already configured two repositories. One is source and another one is target. So inside source repository, we have this folder as deployment groups. So currently my deployment group contains two static deployment and one dynamic deployment. For creating a new dynamic deployment group, we need to go to the object which needs to be added into that group. Suppose I want object from info.mdm folder from the workflow, this particular workflow. Right click and go to the view history. So we can see there is only one version available for this particular workflow. What we can do, we can right click on that. If there is a multiple versions, you can right click on any version and that version can be added to the deployment group. For adding this particular object into the existing deployment group, is also possible, or we can very well create a new deployment group. Suppose I have creating new deployment group like group test. So I need to assign a query which should return the object what I need. So I have already written two queries. These queries has been written with the help of labels. So new query 1, if we edit this, we can see this new query 1 is written on top of label this and object name this. If we execute this query, this is the result of this query. We can see we are able to get the object of the version 1. So with the same method, I have already created this group 1 as a dynamic. If we see in this group 1, it's a dynamic deployment, and new query 1 has been assigned. This failure was because I have cancelled my addition. This is a group what I told you I have already created for demo purpose. If I right click and do the view content, I can see my object is coming out as the result set. So I can very well deploy this particular group to target. There is a two method for deployment. Either I can do edit, copy, and target, paste, or I can directly drag and drop this to target. So these are all typical options. We need to compare the folders, like we can change the folders as well. Suppose I am using _2 as my target folder. So comparison of folder is for checking the object availability, what objects are changed, what needs to be deployed, all this information. These all are internal information. This may take a time because it has to compare the full folder. So after comparison, you can choose the very well explained options what you need for this particular deployment. So this is already existing copy at the target, so I will replace this with new one. So my deployment has started. So right now, okay, there is a conflict for this particular object. This particular object already exists in this folder, so it is asking me to replace this. I will explain you why it is asking this replace. Let it complete. Okay, we can see my dynamic deployment process has completed successfully. So on the target side, okay, I wanted to explain you why that conflict error came. This is because my source repository is a version repository. If you see, it's a version repository. When this checkout view history option comes, it means it's a version repository. So my source is a version repository and my target is a non-version repository. So as we know, in non-version repository, only one latest version can reside. So that is why when I was copying my deployment from source to target, it was telling there is already a copy available, you need to replace this. So that's why I chose replace option. You can see the history of deployment. So this is the latest deployment what I did. So if this would have been a version repository, then you could have done the rollback as well. But this target is a non-version repository, so we cannot do the rollback. So this is how we use the dynamic deployment group. There are few tips for dynamic deployment process. If you know your set of deployment objects is going to change frequently, then adding those objects into dynamic deployment group is a good option rather using a static deployment group. Always before you deploy your deployment group, you should preview the objects, by which you can very well have the idea what objects are going to be deployed. You can use this dynamic deployment group to develop multiple objects to deploy on different schedules, because this works on a query based. So you can write a query in such a way so that it should retrieve the objects based on your time schedules. While creating dynamic deployment group, you can have many errors, and there are here few errors what I can explain. First error: if you have created a label on parent object and you have not created on dependent child object, then creation of dynamic deployment group could error out. Second, label not applied on same version of parent and child object will also create issues while creating dynamic deployment group. One more, query does not return non-reusable child objects. If your query is not returning non-reusable child objects, then your dynamic deployment group creation will error out. This is it for the dynamic deployment group. We would like to hear from you. You can write us on the below link. Thank you for watching the video.